Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's session of Digital Futures titled Emerging Greek Hybridities. This session is the first in a series of panels showcasing the work of Greek architects, academics, researchers, designers, and even artists. In today's session, we're featuring Angelos Chronis, Nikoletta Karastathi, Marirena Kladeftira, Evangelos Koutsioumpas, and myself, Smaro Katsangelou. So I will start with a brief introduction of the speakers. First off, in an alphabetical order, just so I'm clear. First off, we have Angelos Chronis, who is the CEO and co-founder of Infrared City, as well as co-director of the Master of AI in Architecture and the Built Environment at the Institute for Advanced Architecture of Catalonia and a senior research engineer at the Austrian Institute of Technology in Vienna. He studied architecture at the University of Patras and architectural computation at the Bartlett in UCL. And he has been a Marie Curie Fellow at the InnoChain Innovative Training Network. He has previously worked as an associate at Foster & Partners, and he has taught at the Bartlett, UCL, the Bauhaus University, the Università Institute IUAV in Venice, and TU Graz, as well as other universities internationally. His work focuses on performative design, simulation, AI, and data-driven design and optimization, as well as interactive interfaces and AR/VR. He has led the development of various design and integrated simulation systems, such as Infrared City, a groundbreaking AI-driven climate simulation network. Next on, we move to Nikoletta Karastathi, who is an architect, lecturer, and PhD candidate at the Bartlett School of Architecture in UCL, funded by the London Arts and Humanities Partnership. With a background in both industry and academia, she has worked at award-winning practices in Newcastle and London, taught at Edinburgh, Newcastle, Bristol, and Cardiff, and previously led the Royal Institute of British Architecture Northeast Research and Innovation Forum. Currently, she is undertaking a placement at the Victoria and Albert Museum, where she is exploring sustainable design and material practices for exhibition design. At UCL, Nikoletta teaches a design for manufacture and design for performance and interaction, focusing on sustainable design practices through materiality, computation, and narrative. She has presented her work at conferences across Europe and the United States, and her work has been showcased at events such as the London Design Festival, Dutch Design Week, the Baltic Center for Contemporary Arts, and Milan Design Week. Her research explores the intersections of architecture, textiles, computation, and material programmability, weaving together myth and science to reimagine contemporary design methodologies toward more situated and ecological practices. Next off, we have Marirena. Marirena is a Design Tech Innovation Fellow and visiting lecturer at Cornell Design Tech. By bridging design, fabrication, and human craft, she investigates adaptive low-impact construction systems. She challenges traditional notions of automation, prioritizing localized anthropocentric solutions that enhance human agency and vocational fulfillment. She has made contributions to digital manufacturing and material processing methods, design methodologies for modular systems, as well as new models of cooperation with construction robots. Her work has earned recognition through awards, invited talks, and exhibitions at prestigious venues, including the Venice Biennale, ZAZ Bellerive Museum, Kunsthalle Zurich, and the Swiss Sustainability Forum. Marirena holds a doctorate from ETH Zurich as an NCCR Digital Fabrication Doctoral Fellow. Her thesis investigated the potential of additive manufacturing for ultra-lightweight modular structures by distilling intelligence in the smallest part of the systems, its joints. Before joining Cornell, she was a postdoctoral fellow, postdoctoral researcher at EPFL, researching human-robot collaboration for adaptive fabrication, hybrid craft, and sustainable reuse practices. Next off, we have Evangelos. Evangelos Koutsioumpas is an architect and engineer from Aristotle University of Thessaloniki and a research graduate with distinction from SCIARC's Masters of Science in Architectural Technologies program, where he received the Si Ming Fung and Craig Hodgetts Award. Evangelos brings a unique perspective on preserving architectural diversity in an age of technological homogenization through a wide spectrum of academic and professional work, such as the innovative CITA Agenda and multiple professional competition participations and awards. His work and interests are at the intersection of technological and advancement tools, architectural expression, and human-centered design principle, past research on digital democracy in architecture and the ethical application of AI in public spaces promises to spark meaningful dialogue about the future of our field. Currently, Evangelos is developing custom agent-based AI pipelines for various urban design processes and workflows as the co-founder of OurPlace.ai. Evangelos is also one of the founders of Non-State Studio, a collective association for manifesting emerging aesthetics fusing media, architecture, and design based in Los Angeles and Athens. Thank you to everybody, to all of our speakers, our panel, for being here today, for participating and contributing towards showcasing groundbreaking research coming from Greek fellows and academics in academia and industry. So we start off with Angelos Chronis, who I have the pleasure here. I will stop sharing my screen with his presentation titled AI, an opportunity for augmenting design intelligence. Thank you so much, Angelos, for being with us, and I leave the stage to you.
Well, thank you for having me. It's a great pleasure to be here. I was just saying in the chat, it's been maybe 5 years since the last Digital Futures thing we did. I think it was back in the beginning when we did one workshop there. So I'm really happy to be here. I'm going to share my presentation. I'm Angelos. I'm Greek, as obviously is the case here for all of us. And I would say I normally call myself more like an AI boomer rather than and a failed architect rather than a sort of like computational designer. But I will show work today. I'm going to stop my presentation, by the way. Let me know if you can see it fine. So today I'm going to talk very, very loosely about my sort of like take on AI, and it is a little bit of a sort of like looking at the past kind of presentation. So I'm not looking at my work particularly, but more the work of my students and some of the work that we've done at the Austrian Institute of Technology, where Infrared City was born. So just a bit of background. I've worked about 15 years. I was at Foster's for a while. I was at UCL teaching, and I was at IAC afterwards. And then I came to Austria where I was leading a lab for 5 years, the City Intelligence Lab in the Austrian Institute of Technology, where we actually developed Infrared City, which is now a spin-off. It's a company on its own. So that's why I'm mostly doing that now. But at the same time, I'm always involved with IAC. I was always teaching, and most of the sort of like student work you'll see here is from there. Where I'm now sort of like directing together with RIT Markopoulou a new master in AI for architecture and the built environment. And so, as I said, the work will be like sort of like a mix of all of these things. And I'm gonna go back in time just to sort of like try to be, the boomer here, probably being the older as well. So I don't know who remembers that era of generative components. That's like about 15 or so, a little bit more years ago, where we were trying to do like computation, sort of like generative or even parametric design with systems like this. This is Bentley's MicroStation and generative components. And we went from that to the kind of spaghetti we see today in Grasshopper, which is a great leap. But we also went from that, which is essentially, for me, was one of the most sort of like advanced things that I did back then when I was in my thesis in Patras, which is to connect a sort of freeform surface to a solar radiation calculation. And that was like a really difficult thing to do. And that's just 15 years ago. And today we have like you go on Food for Rhino and you can download your flavor of analysis or generative design tool. And I'm asking myself, where does AI take us with all of this? Where can we go next, and what opportunity is it for us? And I'm just going to go loosely on things that I think AI are, like things like data, working with big data. And again, going back in time, this is something I really admire from UCL, my professor Son Hanna's work and the group of the space syntax, where you look at city and you're just looking at the axial map, this sort of like analytical sort of approach that space syntax has on like how integrated the streets are, and just by plotting those different cities, just by plotting these sort of like multi-dimensional spaces into 2 dimensions with a support vector machine. That's like 15, 16 years ago. You can actually identify what area of the world the city belongs to. You can do the same, for example, with essentially floor plans and the visibility graph analysis, the VGA of space syntax, and you can just like take that, plot it again in a 2 dimensions, a multi-dimensional space, and you can identify where in time a floor plan was actually designed. And that's like as simple as just taking data and reducing its dimensionality. And it is also used today, and it's like a very, very fundamental concept of machine learning or AI. It's just using multiple dimensions. Urban Void is a very nice project from students of mine, where they look at the city of Melbourne. They take all the all the urban voids, essentially the areas where nothing is developed, and try to figure out distances to amenities like educational sort of like amenities or hospitals, etc. They can identify where you need what. For example, looking at educational clusters or health clusters, where you can build opportunities in a city to actually balance out the amenities offers. So this is like things that students do within 2 or 3 months. They have zero clue about AIs or programming, and they just go from zero to actually developing a tool, an interactive tool like that, which is a participatory tool where you can actually start adding things and understand the differences it will do to the city. Same thing here. By the way, I'm going to go super fast on several projects because I want to just show like the breadth of what you can do. This is essentially looking at the different streets of Vienna, looking at all the data that's available from where, I don't know, water features or other green features are, and just creating essentially a very sort of like rich data digital twin of the city. And then you can identify different streets and the resilience needs they need, so the resilient needs they have. So essentially figuring out policies on different streets and essentially suggesting them to the city. And this again is just looking at data using simple things like clustering and classifications, and just like very quickly come up with solutions. Then you go one step further, of course, in ML and AI. You can go to vision, and you can go to this sort of like multi-layered perceptions, deep neural networks, essentially, where you can actually just take an image and analyze it in multiple layers, and then come up with things like all of other sort of like image models that can identify things, right? Like where is a person, where is a car, how much of that exists in an image. And you look at something which is as simple as that exists now in here's in our sort of like AI toolbox, and you can see what students were doing 5 years ago. This is again like living before the big AI hype, where a student, this is Lu Yang Chang, he's now working at Bauhaus, and you can take street view images and analyze it over panoramic and semantic segmentations, and identify how much person, road, or sidewalk you have, or sky you have in a street view, and then cluster it in different sort of like street types, so essentially narrow alleys or highways, and create accurate representations of the whole city. And going from a human perspective to an actual map of what the city is, without even having any sort of like local information. Same project, same sort of like approach in this project, Bike Mapper, which is looking at safety of biking through the city. We can all get essentially bike path maps, but what do they mean in terms of safety is interesting. So in this case, we're looking at, again, open data features, but also street view images, and identify things like vegetation, lighting, sort of like other like whether you have cobblestone or asphalt, and then you can create accurate maps of light, safety, vegetation, pavement, and then create a route finding application that allows you to go from point A to point B with sort of like your own preferences in terms of in terms of like, safety and other features. Going fast because I know we have like very little time, so I'm just going to try to be like respectful of that. So going into simulation and essentially evaluating performance, and that's something I really have worked a lot on. Like I think most of my work it has been on performance-driven design. In the City Intelligence Lab, this was also what we were trying to do, bring all the different performance aspects in design. So we were doing a lot of different sort of like analytics, like for example, shortest paths and figuring out sort of like, how integrated any point in the city is, how to plan new mobility networks, etc. But also we looked at a lot of sort of like climate analysis. In this case, we're looking at sort of like, sorry, there's a slide missing here. So essentially, that's a rainfall simulation. We're trying to identify sort of like locations in the city where buildings need essentially resilience maps. But the problem with simulations with analytics is that they take a lot of time. So for me, in my whole career, I focused on computational fluid dynamics, like wind simulations, and the typical wind simulation of a sort of like small urban area can take like even 3 days to do. We developed infrared. Infrared is essentially an AI-based framework that allows you to do that simulation in a second. And I'm going to talk a little bit about how this was done. Of course, you all have seen these sort of models either through this sort of like more technical form, the generative adversarial networks or GANs, or through this form where you can have like sort of like back in the day when you could essentially feed a model a picture, a photograph, and it could generate another picture, like photograph to a Van Gogh painting or a zebra to a horse. You could do this with videos as well, or you could do it with yourself, essentially feed it a picture of yourself and make you look like your father. We did the same kind of with climate simulation. So essentially, what you see on the right is a prediction of our model. What you see on the left is essentially the simulation. So we used these generative adversarial networks to make simulations instant. And to do that, of course, we took like cities like Vienna, and we ran thousands of simulations with which we trained these sort of like deep learning models to predict the simulation results. And this was like a big breakthrough, what caused also sort of like the spin-off of Infrared City as now a company, a software company that we've now developed this as a proper software, and we're offering it to people. It can do a lot of things like predicting heat, wind, solar radiation, thermal comfort, and other things in the urban scale. We're expanding into noise, rain, other things. And this is kind of like how Infrared City was used in the lab and outside of the lab through Grasshopper, through other sort of like interfaces. I'm not going to talk too much about Infrared City here because I would like to focus more on the opportunities of AI. But essentially, it allows you to really very quickly understand and compare urban forms and evaluate them and design with, let's say, if we can say that, with real-time wind prediction, so you can move a park around in a city and see instantly what would normally take 3 days, which means that it completely changes the way you're designing. And I'm going to go now into the sort of like what we can do with these sorts of capabilities, the generative capabilities of AI, which means that we go from back in the day where we could just like populate typologies or create master plans very quickly just by adding numbers to actually essentially sketching form. Let me just close this. Okay, so you can literally like sketch form. Today you have like so many generative tools out there that you can play around with just like shapes and typologies. This is essentially Rayed Mohammed's work from the City Intelligence Lab. He's now at Henning Larsen. And combining the generative capabilities with the performance analytics, like in this case, Infrared City with generative design, means you can actually go from just generating form to actually generating informed solutions who have performance attached to it. And in this case, we're looking at generating thousands of different potential sort of like quarters for a city, which actually also have wind simulations, like wind comfort simulations attached to them. Something which is like literally impossible. I mean, I've been for 15 years trying to do this, and I was super happy when I saw that. But what I want to show with this video is essentially how you can go between, let's say, this black box generating 1,000 options to you coming back and saying, okay, I know this option works. I know what I want to do here. I want to add a tower. So I take this tower, I put it in the design, and I throw it back to the system, and the system comes back with where this tower should be. And this is a reinforcement learning using our infrared city sort of like real-time simulation and reinforcement learning and an existing optimized through genetic algorithm solution, which the combination of these three make it like a very interesting example of performance-driven design through AI. And now finally, I think Smaro, please cut me off if I don't have time. We're talking about this imagination aspect. Like, I mean, we all seen this sort of like boom of Mid-Journey when back in the day you could access it through Discord. I mean, to the point that many people got fed up with it. But it really presented a lot of like opportunities for architecture. I mean, this is just a student project. Again, go from zero programming skills, zero sort of like AI to developing something that allows you to just very quickly, you know, sort of let's say adapt your existing sort of indoor environment, just like adding sort of features to it or changing materials. But even more importantly, in terms of imagination, is I think Neil knows this project quite well. This is from my co-founder and very good friend Theodore Galanos, the architects, which essentially just going from text to actual floor plans, so text to in this case sort of like text to a house. You say house with one bathroom and two bedrooms, etc. And you can generate essentially that floor plan, but you don't just generate a floor plan, you generate like an actual floor plan which has also performance attached to it, and that's what I find really fascinating about this. And another project that I think is kind of like interesting is Gen City, which essentially looks at, you know, participatory design, how actually you can use this idea of like generative image generations sort of like skills to, you know, reimagine the public space and just, you know, with just a few keywords, see what a public space could look like if you just, like, you know, populated these things in. I think this is going to be the final project that I will show, which is Tree Hopper, which is for me a really nice project, which is what we did for the city of Vienna. Had a hackathon on solutions for regenerative design, and this was essentially our solution for tree planting. So essentially the city wants to plant 25,000 trees, and we made a participatory planning sort of tool where essentially the user can essentially open the plan of the city and just start planting trees. And every time you plant a tree, you see the performance that this tree has on the environment. So essentially you have a, you know, infrared city simulation behind it that shows you in real time what the tree does in the thermal comfort, wind comfort of the city. But we go one step further. You can actually go outside. I'll skip through that, and you can start planting. Sorry, you can start planting your trees in situ and using AR and see the essentially the effect the trees would be having on the visual aspect of the space. And I think that eventually, as architects, we might be able to actually, you know, visualize and measure and evaluate and be able to imagine, you know, architecture artifacts in situ and with the performance. The question here, going back to AI, and, you know, you probably all know the Turing test of, like, you know, I'm asking someone behind a sort of like a wall questions, and if I don't understand if they are a computer or if they are a person, then I've reached sort of like you know, general artificial intelligence, which of course there's the Chinese room argument, which is, you know, you probably all know it. If someone has like an infinite amount of symbols of Chinese translations, doesn't mean that it actually, you know, the person actually understands Chinese. That's not the question here. The question is, how do we understand design, you know, intelligence, and I'm sort of like translating that to our ability to develop designs to sort of like create sustainable and livable cities. And here I'm asking myself what the opportunity is. And I think since we are in a Greek sort of circle, I'd like to bring this this aspect to it, which is essentially you know, the aspect of climate change. And I used to have these slides, you know, this is like stats of 2023, you know, what happened in our world from climate change, and specifically in Greece. I used to pitch Infrared City with these stats because in one summer, in less than a month, we lost 2% of our land in wildfires and 5% of our GDP in floods. And, you know, we are architects, we are developing these cities. It's kind of like mostly our fault that we you know, we have these urban environments that essentially contribute so badly to climate change. 40% of emissions come from us. So we have to feel that responsibility, of what we are creating. And I always like to show sort of like this example, the sort of like walkie-talkie building from Vignoli, and which was essentially renamed to Scorci-Talkie because it was melting essentially the cars of people. And we have the ability to avoid these things. And we did it. He did it twice. He did also the Zara Hotel in Vegas. So my sort of like pledge goes back to sort of like our responsibility as architects to really use AI to make more sustainable cities and more sustainable, more livable buildings. And yeah, I'll finish with this quote from, I don't know who is it from. I've stolen it from Reinhard Koenig, professor at Bauhaus, and also very good friend and collaborator at the City Intelligence Lab, that the computers are incredibly fast, accurate, and stupid. Man is unbelievably slow, inaccurate, but brilliant, and the marriage of the two can be a force beyond calculation. And on that, I'm going to stop. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Angelos, for this reflection and for all your work within your own company, but also in education. Now we will have time for questions and discussion after all of the presentations. So now I would like to move on to the next speaker, Evangelos Koutsioumpas, who is going to present his project in SciArc and whatever he did with it afterwards, titled Zeta Gente. Thank you, Evangelos. I leave the stage and the screen share up to you.
Thank you, Smaro, for this beautiful preface. Thank you, everybody, for being here. Angelos, this is amazing work. I am speechless, and I'm currently looking forward to see what everybody has done. Literally grateful for being here. Thank you. So my work is titled Zeta Gente, and it is a platform that allows communities to have agency over the local built environment. This is an AI stack platform built on Discord that brings together stakeholders, residents, and city representatives to improve communication regarding urban space and to allow for transparency in urban projects. Also, it is used to explain processes. It is useful for communities to generate data for their neighborhoods and gives them access to AI tools that perform different tasks. So the main idea for this came from the seminal book by Angelos Chronis, in which he describes urban artifacts and collective memory. Urban artifacts as monuments, buildings, and primary infrastructure that act as anchors in the urban space. They have a sort of gravitational pull towards them by just preserving and shaping the collective memory of the city. And as a collective memory, he describes shared cultural and historical conscience of a community, and finally describes the city as a stack of layers, as a living archive of experiences. So I was very interested in this particular interaction between the collective memory and the urban artifacts, and how is this relationship working when we use memory and we create memories through monuments and we cement it in the urban fabric, and then this goes back again to shape the collective
memory. I'm sorry to interrupt. There's a problem with your mic right now, just this last few seconds. So.
Oh, can you hear me?
Can anybody give some input in case my speaker is
faulty? No. It's a little choppy. Would you mind either getting closer to the mic or checking to see if the signal's there? Yep.
Okay, yes, I'm gonna try that. Thank you.
Yeah, it works great.
Oh wow, beautiful, great voice.
I'm blushing. Thank you. So yeah, I was saying that I was very interested in the relationship between the collective memory and the urban artifacts, as Rosie described them, and that we use and create memories through monuments, and which in turn give structure to a city and then shape the collective memory of the future generation. So I was very interested to see what makes an artifact. Obviously, it has to guide urban development and influence how cities grow and evolve, and it has to apply a certain urban identity to a place and to enhance continuity between the past and the future. But as I was diving deeper into that topic, I was starting to think like in this day and age that we are living right now with AI rapidly accelerating practically everything around us, are tomorrow's artifacts necessarily buildings? So I think that we can make a good parallel by thinking the new artifacts as platforms in which we can store and interact with the collective memory in digital spaces and have the opportunity to shape the urban environment by interacting with new custom-made and tailor-made AI models. So this is the area that my platform aims to be in. It aims to be a digital artifact for the city, and it aims to connect, record, influence urban development, and actually give communities agency for decision making and involve them in the processes more. So the process is simple. You join by giving your zip code, which in turn takes you to a Discord server, which is dedicated to this zip code. So essentially, this is tailor-made for each neighborhood. Once the users join the server, they can see a wide range a wide range of tools available. So this is on Discord, since Discord has a good building environment that lets you develop things very easy, and it's actually kind of a familiar user interface. I'm talking about AI agents, and these tools are LLM automations that have access to specific functions that can, for example, search the web, summarize documents, or you can build your own tool to pretty much do whatever you want with it. And then this is an intersection between the city, the users, and the AI. So the AI agents that I'm going to present today are the essentials, as I like to name them, in this process. They all work with data gathering and classification. So agents can go online and they have this capability of getting massive amounts of data and going through it really fast and classifying it according to preset rules. And the whole idea is to combine data from the servers, which is provided by the communities or by the stakeholders, with existing data that you can find online and it's public, and create tailor-made data sets for each neighborhood. One of the agents, the image generation agent, which is actually a compilation of scripts. It actually starts by getting a prompt from the user on how he imagines the neighborhood, and then goes online to perform a brief research on the identity of the neighborhood and a brief census research, so that it can always create contextual images and relevant to the place that we're talking about. Next, there is the visualizer agent, which is actually a regulation visualization. So this agent can take regulations and actually create architectural diagrams, in essence, showing regulations in a more visual and intuitive manner, which is easier to understand and more, like, let's say, intuitive than regulation in PDF. Then we have like the file talker, which is something that right now is like very common, but back when I was doing this was kind of like not so widespread. You can present this agent with a file, and actually it can create a knowledge base, which is essentially it limits the large language models knowledge to this specific document that you have provided, and it can actually answer questions on this document. So this can be very useful for legislation and, let's say, or policy regarding administration, whatnot. And now we're going to one of my favorite agents, which is the urban reporters, as I like to call them. This is a stack that actually creates different scripts in the backend, but essentially it can create automated reports on this specific neighborhood that it resides in its server, which it resides. And it's programmed to start by doing past research on some projects, combining it with census research, finding future projects that are scheduled to happen there, pulling OSM data from the web to suggest a project based on what it sees, and essentially compile it into reports that can be passed around. So we end up with the outcome of this platform are different concepts for each neighborhood, different spatial rules, and essentially massive iteration in the end of different space. And this is all powered by AI. Yeah, I think that was it. I was trying to be very fast. Like,
Thank you so much, Vangelis, for your contribution. This is amazing work, and I hope it really becomes an initiative that the city of LA or whichever else county in the US or across the world could adopt in order to ameliorate or kind of like democratize the way participatory design or the urban sphere is structured. So now we move on to Nikoletta Karastathi with her presentation, Weaving Pixels. Thank you, Nikoletta, for accepting the invitation and participating. So we wait for you to share your screen and you can take the stage.
Thank you very much. Can you see?
No, not yet.
Not yet. So, oh no. Oops. I did download. Oh, did a mistake. Could someone else go first? I downloaded the app, but now it needs reinstallment.
Well, okay. We could swap the order if Marirena would be okay with that. In the meantime,
Or I can log in online and just don't have the sound. I just did it for the sound, but I had the.
We would, yeah, okay.
Prefer that. Give me 1 second.
Sure, no worries. Well, you can, like, if it's only going to take 1 to 2 minutes, it's fine. We are waiting, no worries.
I think I did.
You have a digital twin.
And I deleted my digital twin. Aye. Share screen. Okay. Cool. You can see now.
Looks great.
Perfect. Sorry about this. So, hello, and thank you very much for the great introduction and also for the invitation. So within the presentation, I'll primarily talk about my research part of the PhD work and some design projects that relate to the work, but I'll start with a bit more of the methodology. But before all of this, I will actually start with only 2 slides of kind of the work at Design for Manufacture we do at UCL. So as part of the program, we're looking at sustainable methods of construction using different material practices from earth construction to impact printing, to timber or to zero waste manufacturing, to looking at different textile processes or textile interfaces, from actuated to robotic weaving, or for instance, what you see at the top right is a hybrid composite of textiles, biocomposite that also includes powder from invasive plant species. So the work really varies, but I'm not going to go into actual details of the student project, but some of the ideas you would see later on also that kind of resonate with the work and the methodology I do. So within my practice or within my work, I primarily work around textiles, architecture, computation, and materiality. And within that process, I use textiles as a theoretical method, but also as a construction methodology. And within the process, the idea is to look at those craft and computational processes and explore new kind of design methodologies. And in doing that, as part of the methodologies, they look at decoding or looking at actually ancient textile practices as a way to inform, resynthesize, and recode current design and fabrication processes. And also being today as part of this forum, you will see a few nice Greek references. So as part of the decoding practice, there are actually two key aspects of the work. One is looking at the storytelling and the myth telling through the textile processes. And the second is looking at the actual fabrication methods of those processes. So for instance, the relationship of, let's say, the loom with the pattern, but also with the locality of the materials and the community, and what do those interrelationships might mean or might reveal. And my favorite example, and actually there are so many things that you can look within the pattern synthesis or signification, but my favorite example is the relationship that is said to be between the textiles, the woven textiles, narrative, song, and rhythm. So there are two different kinds of relationships. One is kind of what we see here, which is a mnemonic relationship. So how a particular pattern relates to how they used to remember the textile patterns. But there is also evidence for kind of how visual rhythm is translated within textile practices, which is what you see here. And these are examples of Navajo weaver carpet. So for instance, the text on the side reflects to the rhythm of the text on the side reflects to the visual rhythm of the carpet, which actually I find quite fascinating. And kind of staying a bit more within the myth as a device or as a tool to think through the complex relationships between history, reality, culture, imagination, and identity. And also, again, looking a lot at Greek myths, but also looking at the different functions of them, or what could we kind of subtract or think through those practices. So, for instance, what are the stories told through kind of female through their clothes as kind of untold stories, or that there is a strong relationship between the manufacturing or the myths and the actual landscape. Or for instance, if we look at Penelope, the relationship with the temporality and the time of construction and deconstruction. So there are a few things that kind of can become drivers of thinking through practices. But I think the one that is actually quite interesting and important is also how myth can be adaptable to a context and can be that active kind of driver to think through different perspectives within that process. And that is not only that practice or that kind of situated practice or the relationship between landscape, myth, textiles, and also the fabrication techniques is not something unique clearly to Greece. So we can see very good examples from, again, Navajo weavers, and there are a lot of different cultures around the world that they have similar examples as ways to synthesize and explore those interconnections. And going back kind of to the diagram, or to how we can, once we kind of analyze or decode those practices, how we can start rethinking and recoding those practices. So that's where kind of the title comes from, in terms of how do we start weaving together those data, those stories, those pixels, and those materials together. And in doing so, could that kind of prompt or lead to a more situated and more ecological and interconnected approach of designing? And now kind of moving forward to the fabrication part of like the 4 initial key points, which has on its own two different subparts. So one is looking at the fabrication of the materiality, and the second is looking at the actual fabrication of the textiles itself. So now I'll just kind of go quickly through a few examples, and then at the end we're going to see one project that kind of puts everything together in a way. So when I started years ago, my interest in textiles, I was very much interested in working with natural fibers, with wool and cotton, and its response, or its kind of response to heat and environmental conditions as a simulation of how the material gets response. But in response to that, actually, that kind of initiated my passion, or like thinking through how you can actually start creating those materials or tuning those materials. So my toolbox kind of changed, and this became my new tool set. So started thinking through and understanding hydrogels of biomaterials as a way to construct, or as a way to think through and understand and program those materials. And now you will see three projects very briefly, that all of them kind of respond to different environmental stimuli. So for instance, this one was designed in response to raising awareness of antimicrobial resistance, but also to thinking through how those textiles or those materials not only can be environmentally, let's say, friendly, but also can act as a way to think through a notion of care for our environment and for the skins around us. Moving to this prototype, that this was, so these hydrogel yarns were infused with living algae with different percentages. So again, thinking through the relationship with living organisms within those skins and how they grow through those processes. To the final project that uses, so it is, there are yarns and materials made out of cabbage water, actually, which has a particular pigment that once it's exposed into different pHs, so either if it's acidic or basic, then it changes color. So you can see here that the yarns actually under the microscope and the different colors that you can get. And oops, and here is a prototype that kind of uses a knitted substructure as a substructure, but also then you can see how the yarn, once you have within a pipette, we kind of have different pH of acidic or basic substances, that it changes color in response to the substance that we have given. And in a way that has, again, both dual practice in the sense that it responds to the environment, but it also tells a particular story about it. And now moving to the second part, which is more the computational fabrication side of things. So far we've seen more the understanding of the materiality and the storytelling and manual knitting, but also, as some of us might know, knitting has that particular relationship where each pixel can be really translated into a digital bitmap, and then you can really simulate. And I was fortunate enough to get funding and have this worktop knitting machine, and that's how my kind of journey within the CNC knitting has begun. So as part of the process, the initial part of the process was to actually understand how the machine works. So here you can see an example of the fabrication methods. On the side, you see you can knit at the front, or you can knit at the back, or you can knit back front, and that does give you infinite, and that is only an example, amount of possibilities of what you can do structurally, but also what materials and yarns you can integrate as part of that process. However, as every knitting machine, that comes with its own proprietary software, and it does require people having an in-depth understanding of how these processes work, which can limit, in a way, how much you can open up that process. So as part of a research project, what we did was that we created the plugin in Grasshopper that then would directly create the code that would be read by the software of Kniterate. And so that was the idea, was that through that process, we would be able to enhance the accessibility and hopefully open up the process a bit more. And as part of that, what we had to do is to first also understand the input that the machine requires. So for instance, it requires one bitmap that talks about the number of the typology of stitches that you need to input. And the second is also the yarn that you need to input. So you need two different sets of information in order to do that. And this kind of became the vocabulary of the bitmaps or the pixels that could be used. So each of them relate to a particular function or within a particular function within the knitting operations. And as part of the process, you can see here some of the examples, the bitmaps created, and also the knitted samples that go within that process. And again, as part of that, so that was one part of the plugin. I mean, there are a lot of things that can be done to be improved, but the second part that we were interested to look at is to look at kind of create a customizable variable density subtool. What does that actually really mean? So if you want to create a lace structure or transfer or the images that you saw before, you need to move the front stitches to the back and then move them back there. So what does that actually really mean? It means that if you were to input this image here where you're saying effectively that my black pixel is that I don't really knit there, the software itself or the particular software of Knitted will not really understand that. So you'll have to have all those in between operations in order to achieve that. So as part of the plugin, what we did is that we created an in-between step where the program would detect and say, okay, I see this type of pixel, then I would have to input the in-between steps. And then it outputs that code automatically. And you will soon see at the end of the presentation how that has enabled for more kind of customizable or adaptable kind of lace pattern creation. And to kind of conclude, I'll take you through a project that actually does relate to the forest fires of 2021 in Athens, and it was a more of a sentimental approach or prompt, but somehow that project has carried through that landscape and the project explored some of the ideas that we've already seen. So the initial part or the initial response was to actually use it as a way to create yarns out of the ashes. So by visiting the site, using the ashes as a way to create a knitted textile that is made out of the ashes of the barren landscape. And within that process, then those yarns, depending on how you construct them, can once they kind of dry up, they become quite they lose the water and they become actually like this. So the idea was that through kind of covering or using the trees as a mold in order to create those two pieces that were kind of the material, but also the spatial memory of the tree. So that was playing more into the storytelling of the materiality, but also rethinking and reusing materials from the forest. The second part of that was to create the story cloth, or to create a story cloth that would talk about what happened within the forest fires, which is the part that probably you won't hear, but I can still play it. So the idea behind that was that you have three different voices. So the first one that you currently see is the translation of data of what actually happened. So for instance, how many acres were burned during that summer. The second part of the voice is more of a personal voice. So it is actually myself within the site saying, narrating what actually happened. And the third part of the voices is actually the tree is like, if it was kind of strangely fascinating. If you were to go close to the trees, you could still hear the crackling noise of the trees. So through those these voices were then interwoven together They were kind of, and then they created the file of the knitted cloth that narrates what actually happened. So you can see them here separate, but then you can see the final knitted cloth. And I will finish very soon. And the last prototype was the one that was actually testing the last part of the plugin that we saw. So by using still the same kind of voices, what we did is to translate the same voices, but into the kind of the lace patterns. And to understand what actually the plugin does is that if this is the file that you need to knit, the plugin automatically creates all the transfers, which means that if we didn't have the plugin, I would have to program manually 2,825 pixels. And that is a close-up of how that actually looks within the program. And to just show and this is the prototype. So the prototype was, again, it was actually a hybrid. So it both combined the stories and the data voices, but it also combined the us. So it is, the textile is also infused, as you can see here, with the us materiality. So it's a combination of both techniques, let's say, both material and visually. And I think this is I have this one. And as a way kind of to close, I mean, what we've seen is kind of different examples and different ways of doing these translations, and that there is there are a lot of ways that you can think through how these can happen, from like a performance coding level of how you want the textile to be actually structural, to the materials that you use and how the materials can have their own performance, but then how do you actually, through the things you construct, tell or retell those stories or recode them and retranslate them. And I think that is me. Thank you very much. And sorry for the beginning.
Thank you so much, Nikoletta. Great presentation. The breadth of the work is impressive. And now we move to Marirena with her presentation titled Post-Digital Hybrids. Thank you so much, Marirena.
Yeah, thank you so much for the invitation, the kind introduction, Smaro. It's super nice to be here. I think it's my first time in kind of like an all Greek panel, so kind of exciting. I decided to only show more or less 2 projects of my work to be able to talk a little bit more about them. But I titled this presentation Post-Digital Hybrids, as in general with my work, I try to kind of dissect the relations, tensions, and synergies between hybrid entities, materials, technologies, and actors of making. And post-digital really refers to that notion that the application of technology should be situated in its respective context and in a human-centered approach. Oh. Okay. Yeah. So with my work, I ask how we can rethink our constructive systems with technology in order to ethically respond to an ecosocial crisis. And I think, as all of you here, kind of like our past experiences situate our positions and our work. Just briefly, my journey has been that I have learned and worked in very different contexts, and I think this has shaped a little bit how I view and how I move forward my work. So after my studies in Greece, I actually joined a research lab there that looked at more transformable interactive spaces in TU Crete. And then I kind of moved to Switzerland, where a lot of the work there has shaped my scholarship in digital fabrication, where I also acquired my PhD. And in the past year, I moved to EPFL in Lausanne, jointly appointed between two labs there, before I actually, as of this year, made Cornell my academic home in this new Department of Design Technology. That is actually an initiative of a radical collaboration between disciplines in design, science, and technology. So I think Angelos couldn't have made a better outro for me. You actually touched upon a lot of the things that I wanted to actually bring forward. I think we're all aware here of the impact of our industry to the environment. We contribute hugely to emissions, the depletion of resources, and energy consumption. But we often fail to also talk a bit about the social aspects and the labor challenges and complications that we have in our industry. And although tech has really infiltrated our lives completely, we have yet to see its transformative potential in construction, perhaps. So a lot of the research that is out there is really looking into this kind of lightweight or modular structural systems that try to tackle these challenges, or at the use of regenerative materials that we can source locally, and also at kind of like the reuse or repurposing materials for having multiple life cycles. What is interesting is that space frames actually can encompass all of these qualities. They are modular, they are super efficient in their structural system, and use very little material, and they can also be kind of like circular and can be disassembled and reconfigured. But what is really interesting to me about the system was that through their joints, they are the components that kind of determine their form, their assembly and disassembly, and how kind of like circular or reconfigurable that system is. So for me, that kind of created an opportunity to encapsulate all the parameters of a structural system in these kind of small, very small components by distilling intelligence only in the joints, so we can have actually the maximum impact on the performance and formal quality of the structure. And during my PhD, I kind of developed this framework to tackle, let's say, this topic a bit more holistically, because there are indeed a lot of factors to consider when we are designing for like hundreds of these small components into one structural system. And we can actually dilute maybe or concentrate this into 4 pillars, main pillars around designs, material and manufacturing and assembly, and what are the extensions that these pose to actually also consider the eco-social footprint of those structures. And with this kind of framework, I had the opportunity during my PhD to investigate different aspects of that into different systems that we could materialize at real scale, which was kind of very informative. But maybe I can just tap a bit more into one aspect right now. So one of the things that I started with was looking at the design methods that we had actually up to that point to design for those structures. And the most common ones were either topology optimization for the joints, or explicit methods of modeling like mesh structures or B-reps to actually make these differentiated geometries. But what I propose is that actually none of the previous examples, maybe it's a good way to go about tackling that problem, and actually implicit modeling offers an opportunity that can be a lot more flexible and gives us a new perspective on that. So using this kind of design method, I created a computational tool that modularizes also the joint design in the structures to kind of dissect it into a core part that is the minimal part of this component that needs to be customized to tailor fit its specific case. And then we can have a large geometry of components, functions, and transformations to that we can actually fuse together at will on the specific use case. So in this way, we can really kind of tailor its connection for its specific location in the structure, add all the special requirements for assembly or local transformation, and tailor material-specific constraints, for example, when working with hybrid material systems, while still maintaining a coherent architectural vocabulary throughout the structure. And I really had this opportunity to leverage that framework for a project of an ultra lightweight structure as kind of a test bed for balancing biogenic and artificial materials, and also standard and bespoke parts. So this system that we created for this project, that was called the Digital Bamboo, was extremely efficient. It only weighed 5 kilos per square meter, and it actually covered an area of around 40 square meters, if I remember correctly. And why was bamboo actually interesting to investigate? We know that the global material use will continue to intensify, but actually most of that construction activity is expected to happen in the global south. And bamboo is, of course, a natural material that can be sourced locally there. It has a very short harvesting cycle, and it's also super strong. So this is very interesting for construction. But of course, there are limits to its use, or kind of challenges. And one of that is the natural variability that it has. And we have seen a lot of those kind of systems that try to make this composites, non-reversible composites, that is also because of the limitations we have of the existing connection systems. So we actually try to look a bit more on how we can reverse this kind of mindset, take a bit of inspiration of how locals and what is the tradition of actually bamboo construction. And we really wanted to figure out a system where we process minimally the poles, and then we have kind of like an easy way to assemble them and also reverse them if need be. So we started with this kind of idea of a knot where you can attach just simply the element to a connection system that can be 3D printed. And there really 3D printing offers a lot of flexibility into what we can design. And I collaborated with some researchers from structural design. We developed this framework to test all these connection systems and evolve this kind of idea, ending up in this joint that you see here in the picture that has this kind of clips. So it's composed of modular parts, and it has rotational freedom, and this can be very useful in handling complex assemblies. But it also features this kind of bespoke and standard parts. So you only really need to fabricate the bespoke parts every time, and then the rest could be even kind of mass produced or have a different materiality and so on. And this really brings it back to this kind of framework, because using that, we can really tailor and adjust all the components. Although they seem quite similar, they're actually all kind of different, and they really adapt to the specific needs of the location that they are placed. And that can be, handling different bundles of material. It can be attaching to facade panels, skins, having post-tensioning cables, and so on. We had also the great chance to exhibit this during the Venice Biennale in 2021 at the Marirena Gardens. That was a very positive experience because of how efficient the system was. We actually flat packed the whole structure. We send it with minimal volume there, and then we kind of crowdsourced the assembly to people that were there that actually had no prior knowledge or experience with the system, but it was kind of almost like Lego pieces to put together. So fast forward, kind of a lot of investigations and projects later. As I was finishing my PhD, I was focusing a lot on modular schemes and how we can automate their assembly in an effort to kind of alleviate humans from working at great heights and performing complex tasks in unsafe conditions. And this somehow transcended very well in my postdoc project, as the same challenges actually exist in the practice of deconstruction and reuse. It's largely manual heavy work, and there are also many logistics involved. At the same time, much like space frame assembly, it is a task that is kind of very challenging to fully automate, let's say. And so I try to find a new model of cooperation between laborers and construction robots, rethinking how might we cooperate in situated contexts, share tasks that need in situ decision making and expertise. And in this case, we investigated how to repair and reconfigure a typical European timber structure, like the one you see here in this hybrid relationship, while giving maximum agency to the human that actually operates on the construction site. And again, a lot of this complexity really, again, boils down to the connection system of the structure and kind of learning from the artisanal way of wood framing. So robots might kind of support, cut, remove, add components based on the human's instructions, and vice versa. The worker can support actually the robot in its tasks by placing supports where needed, releasing connections that require perhaps a bit more agility than the robot can handle, perform cuts that or other tasks where robots might have actually limited reachability. And as you saw, one of those when there are, for example, connections too close to the ground, or a system anyway in any way where they might get stuck. And the goal here is really kind of make use of each actor's best strengths and release the worker from the heavy tasks of carrying loads or operating in safety hazardous zones. And the idea really is that this is not some kind of closed off fence where you have the robots operating in a space and you have to stop the process and kind of like enter and mitigate, but treating it kind of like an active construction site where both entities can operate in fluidity to be more efficient and more strategic, if you will, about their role in the process. Yeah, so I only shared kind of a glimpse of that multifaceted work, but I would maybe like to end with highlighting the cross-disciplinary aspects of all this project and how I believe it is kind of imperative to find the synergies between different fields of study in the sciences and the humanities to shift from just architectural making, but to the creation of architectural systems that respect technological, economical limits, but also social aspects like labor, access, equity, and craft. And I think, yeah, with that, I will stop.
Thanks so much for your presentation, Marirena. So now, I mean, it's a little bit awkward for me to introduce myself to a certain extent, but I'm a practicing architect and engineer from Greece. My professional practice focuses on exhibition and museum design, as well as historic building and monument restoration. My practice has won the 2024 Portimao Museum Prize in the European Museum of the Year Awards, as well as the Activist Museum Award by the University of Leicester. I'm currently undertaking my PhD in the Computer Science Department at Florida Atlantic University, where I'm using AI as a vehicle for spatializing and amplifying non-canonical narratives and ways of making. I have published and presented my research across multiple institutions, including TU Delft, Georgia Tech, Singapore University of Technology and Design, Universitat Internacional de Catalunya, IAC, and others. I teach second and fourth year design at Florida Atlantic University in the architecture department. And today I would like to focus on a project that I had done before even coming to the US, actually. And how do I make this? Give me a second, I'm sorry. Present. I thought it was F6. No, it's not. Well, anyways, so this project employs different techniques of AI, different AI tools for clustering, material classification, because it's a museum and archive in Greece, and it's currently just in the implementation stage. I was initially hired by the Ministry of Culture in Greece to do this job back in 2022. And based on the stiffness and kind of like slow pace that most Greek projects in the cultural realm usually have, it's like the reflexes are not really there in for the practicing architect in Greece. So, and also like there's not a lot of room for changes and all these things. So it cannot really follow the current discussion or discourse in AI and innovation in design for Greece. So that has been my experience at least. Yet again, my name is Smaro. I'm an architect and engineer from Aristotle University of Thessaloniki. I have a Master's of Science in Preservation, Conservation, and Restoration of Cultural Monuments. And I'm doing a PhD in the Connected Autonomy and Artificial Intelligence Lab at FAU. So this project is set in Chalkidiki, Greece, in northern Greece, in Polygyros, in this small vernacular kind of like settlement, as we would say, in the mountain of Kolomondas. Here is how the main square looks, as well as the adjacent buildings. This is the building that was restored and is kind of like what this project is about from another perspective. This is a vernacular building with proto-industrial functions in the main floor, on the first floor, such as let's see here, a stone mill, which we can see later, like over here, a stone mill, as well as some a barrel for winemaking, and a furnace for silk worms. So this building is the mansion, the vernacular mansion of Stephanos Koutsioumpas, built in 1894, stone and lumber as the main building materials, and a prominent example of Northern Greek and Balkan vernacular architecture. Here are some other pictures of it, as well as the archive that I was called to spatialize and kind of like exhibit within the space. This is a 2 million euro project in terms of how much the restoration and the exhibition would cost overall. These were the images before the restoration. It's what I was called to do was to exhibit 3 distinct archives: Stephanos Koutsioumpas' personal archive, the daily newspaper Voice of Chalkidiki archive from 1930 to 1961, as well as the photography archive of Polygyros. So Stephanos Koutsioumpas, born in 1908 in Chalkidiki, studied law in Athens and continued his studies in Paris, went on to become a parliament member in 1951, representing Chalkidiki, and is a prominent figure for the area. The archive comprises of 270 folders of newspaper articles, 65 folders of personal documentation, correspondence, and important documents, 10 volumes of his writings, 4 chests of legal documents, and 21 cardboard boxes of bookkeeping. So, as well as there were newspaper archives, again, from the same periods. The thing with this whole project was none of this is pictorial, none of this is really prime material for exhibition design. Like, it doesn't really relate to the times as well. It's a very canonical narrative of a privileged, educated man from the area. So by default, what I was called to do was a little, I would say, disadvantageous to a certain extent on how it could really live on and be preserved for not only for what it is, but through the lens of our own time. And for the most part, this is the pictorial aspect that helped illustrate all this, the Polygyros Photography Archive, which was from the sole photographer of the area, Argyris Voyagis, who was a self-taught photographer. And he ran a photography studio from the 1920s to the 1980s. He was also born in 1907, close to Stephanos Koutsioumpas, and it comprises of 1,500 photographs and 500 negative films. So these are some details from the actual site. The Ministry of Culture had already undertaken the huge task of creating a digital repository for this cultural and historical archive, which helped a lot when training models and when working with the material kind of like in the data structure for this. So the reality of this was, who are we designing for? Who is going to be here? In the sense that it is a touristic place, there is some influx of people that may come here for the pictures or whatnot. There are also a lot of researchers in different universities in Greece, in political science and history majors, who would be interested to come in and look at the archive in situ and the actual physical remnants of whatever there is, other than the digital repository for further investigation. And then maybe children or like other groups of people that are not really, that cannot really understand the breadth or maybe the history behind whatever is going on. So for this, there were some things that were again the disadvantages, such as how it's not really a photogenic archive. It may not be comprehensible based on how it's a niche part of history, but also a little bit, again, outdated. And how can it be cohesive and can be retrievable and navigated in a time-efficient manner? And for that, the answer would be a breadth-first search instead of a depth-first search. So like really looking into what stories would stick to somebody's mind and be able to illustrate and create a narrative, narrative for the space. So the dual nature of the archive and the exhibition was to store the physical artifacts, making them readily accessible to researchers and citizens, but also interpreting and highlighting narratives of customs and formative times for Chalkidiki society through spatial installations. Yet again, another picture of the space and some architectural details of what the architecture looks like, floor plans. And we moved to how I went about the design decisions a little bit on creating a space solely about his life, where there are AI-generated videos of him talking based on his transcripts and some of the talks, the political talks he had given, and his photographs. So we fed a network with any type of material to bring him back to life in this space. And this can be navigated and seen in situ. This would be his office with some installations, like those are screens that are yet again showing the transcripts from his writings. And this is for the archive of Chalkidiki's newspaper, where some of the highlights are shown from customs such as Easter and like the resurrection of Christ or whatever, which were considered very significant at the time. And then for the basement where the actual archive is stored, there is this panel showing how we go from physical archives to data structures. It's a data visualization, basically, a data visualization method for these panels. And then this space that's an installation that's showing the photography archive as a continuum of like a server room. So like it's creating that duality. And lastly, a clustering method of an AI clustering method for the visual archive, where it shows the different types of photographs that were found, from portraits to group photos to actual like landscape photography. So somebody can browse through it. And finally, here where all of these things are kind of like correlated based on their content with OCR training, where the material, the actual pictorial material is correlated with the written information, so somebody can navigate through it, and based on where the guest is in the space, this kind of like moves in different patterns. This is actually being built right now. So hopefully people will get to view this actual archive and all these installations by 2026. So this is the timeline, and this is again like the Greek reality in practice. And for the final space, this is a kinetic kind of installation, which can move around based on how the people want to use the space, because this is a multifunctional space, showing some of the highlights from the archive based on AI training. Okay, thank you very much. Now I will chair the discussion. I have some questions for our speakers. And I would like to start maybe with Angelos. We can all turn on our cameras if you'd like, so we can look at each other visually. So, Angelos, knowing the Greek status quo and the stiffness of the frameworks and policies regarding urban design, how could we realistically, in the Greek in the Greek territory, start to adopt innovation developed elsewhere in a timely manner? I assume you have lived through that, or you have seen examples in Greece, or of what it looks like, what urban design looks like.
Well, interesting question. I'm not sure I'm a kind of like capable in my capacity to answer that in much depth, because I haven't been in Greece, working in Greece, since maybe 2009. So it's about 16 years now that I'm not in the Greek reality. I do, however, collaborate with a few Greek municipalities, like at least with the Kalamata municipality. I'm from Kalamata, so naturally that's the municipality I collaborate the most with. And the incentive is there, the need is there. We all know the Greek realities, especially in relation to the built environment, is actually pretty difficult. But we are just now with Kalamata, we're just now setting up a research and technology lab that involves sort of like advanced urban planning work. There's many municipalities in Greece that are part of the Net Zero Cities consortium, which is something I'm also kind of like involved. Like, we're submitting proposals for research projects to actually advance the tools, the methods, the sort of like studies on climate resilience. I think that we are uniquely in need of that, like in sense of like we have a significant problem, a climate-related problem. I think we as architects, we have also like an abundance of architect professionals and planners for reasons that are like beyond my scope of discussion here. Like, I was part of a new architecture school that was opened in late 90s, beginning of 2000, for political reasons mainly. So I've benefited from that. But we have too many architects, if I may say. We're producing too many. That's why we see so many architects all around the world. But at the same time, we have the problem. We have the abundance of architects, and we have really, like, as I see here, incredible sort of like professionals and minds all around the world, right? How can we not put all these together and actually try to solve our problems? The regulatory framework is stiff. It's stiff everywhere in the world. It's not just Greece. I mean, like, I live in Vienna. Vienna's city is one of the best sort of in the world in terms of, like, I mean, it's got the largest sort of like social housing stock on earth, as far as I know, and it still has a very stiff and very difficult regulatory framework. That doesn't mean that it.
So you think it's about working like parallel to whatever the status quo is, or like trying to find ways to go beyond?
I'll give you the simplest example. I personally consider Athens as one of the most problematic cities I have ever seen and been and lived in. I have a serious problem with how the city works. At the same time, greenifying Athens is 1,000 times easier than it is to greenify Vienna. So Vienna has like a very traditional, let's say, and I'm comparing these two cities because they're close to me, but it's equally very difficult to greenify New York, right? Greenifying is actually very, very easy. You've got a ton of open like space, like you've got balconies, you've got like terraces, you've got whatever that you could incentivize people to greenify tomorrow. Like you could actually start a program of greenification of Athens like tomorrow morning, and within a few years you'd have like a very green city. Why this is not happening is a different discussion. Like there needs to be a mentality shift, I think, in what it means, and that's what I mean. Like in infrared city, that's exactly what we're trying to do. Is when you're buying that apartment in Kolonaki and you're thinking, oh, it's the penthouse, amazing. Kolonaki is like super expensive because Athens is super gentrified, whatever, nobody can live there, but I can afford it and I can buy it. You're still buying a time bomb of heat. That apartment, that penthouse in Kolonaki would be unbearable, even with the best air conditioning you can put in 20 years. You'd literally be boiling there. And you will probably squeeze every system to make it, cool enough, but it won't be cool enough. But, if you had a green roof and you had a green balcony, it would be a completely different story. If you as an architect are able, and if you as actually a sort of inhabitant of that penthouse apartment, whatever, in Athens, were able to see the actual cost of bad architecture in your health, you would actually request the architect to have the solution implemented. You would request the sort of like incentivization. You would go directly to the incentivization. Like things like the Exicon or whatever it's called, like the sort of like program to upgrade your 20,000-year-old sort of like windows, and they're like essentially insulation capacity is just a way to make people pay less for renovating their house. It's not really helping people change their mentality. What I think is essentially we will shift towards that one way or the other, and we as actors have a unique opportunity to actually change that mentality faster. I'm coming mainly from a climate perspective because that's what I do and I care about, but I think this is going to be the most significant problem we will have in the near future. Of course, there's the aspect of gentrification, social sort of change in Greece that is happening right now. And looking at Evangelos, like thinking about all the participatory opportunities we also don't have. That's also something we're trying to push with the municipality in Kalamata. So we just started a program which is called Imagine the Park, and we're getting the city of Kalamata to actually participate in planning in the regeneration of the park of Kalamata. You need that, because if that happened when we wanted to pedestrianize the most, for me, like, I almost get controversial sort of like discussions about that. The pedestrianization of the Panepistimiou, like of the main road of Athens, was an absolutely brilliant idea. Whoever doesn't understand that doesn't understand basic sort of like urban planning. The way it was done was wrong, because there was no sort of like participation of the people of Athens in that. So I don't know, if I summarize it, I think there's two ways of doing this. This is like our responsibility, like architects, planners, and tool makers like us, making it more easy to get to shift the value from the economic value to the resilience value, which is able to happen and will happen. So essentially, you understanding that you're not just buying a penthouse, but you're also buying a climate comfort in 20 years. And at the same time, the people being part of the planning process. There's fantastic people in Greece that have been involved, like Maria Vasilakou, who was a vice mayor in Vienna. There's the participatory lab. There's like all sorts of people there doing really great work. We just need to have it as, we need to impose it at the end of the day to the municipalities. I mean, even like the latest municipality that is coming from I'm going to say this and I'm going to shut up because I realize I take too much time. The current municipality, supposedly like, municipality that is very close to planning, still hasn't really sort of like implemented, any participatory planning tools in Athens, or any sort of like resilience planning which involves the people. The main problem we have is that we do not agree, we don't commonly agree on what a good future is for our cities. We do not. And the reason why we do not do that is we cannot, first of all, discuss on the future of our cities, so like participate in it. And secondly, we don't have the availability to get the data to show us what that means. That's my opinion.
Thank you so much. That's a very thorough answer and really thought through, which shines through in your work as well. So I would like to move on to Evangelos now. I mean, the last question could also apply to you, Evangelos, but I would like to make it a little bit more specific and ask, from the top of your head or whatever your plans may be for the future, how could we bring together participatory design in the digital sphere, which is something you're already doing, with more interactive activities such as creative placemaking and community strengthening initiatives?
That is actually an excellent question, and I can see how it ties to what Angelos said.
I'm sorry. I think yet again, maybe it's my system. Like I don't, but I cannot really hear you very well.
No, I think it's
What about now?
Yes,
can you guys hear me
Yeah,
now?
perfect. Yeah, get close to the mic.
Okay. I'm sorry. I think there's something happening with my mic today. So what I was about to say is that I can see how it ties with what Angelos said before, and I believe it's a matter of two directions. So first of all, I think that we have to design the interface for that to happen, right? We have to lower the barrier of entry because we want as many people as possible to be able to input data, so we have a clearer picture of what everybody wants, or what's the temperature, let's say, what's the current opinion. And then we as architects, we have the final responsibility of curating this and crafting the tools necessary to curate them automatically, right? So I think the architect in the design position, either it's as an interface designer, tool designer, policymaker, all the tangentials, all the tangential responsibility of architects, I think is going to be a key factor for the future. And we really have to see the examples for that. So in the case of AI, let's say that Midjourney started from, let's say, a chatbot that you could run in a terminal and then hopped onto Discord. So it was an interface that, like, the service was essentially the same, nothing changed. And then now they have their own website, or everything starts like that. Or for example, ChatGPT, the chat interface is very, very specific, and it's like very intentional. It's like to keep context. It could be a canvas, for example, but it's not. So we have to really pay attention to the interface, because we need to draw more people in order to actually set up processes and move forward. And I think our role is gonna evolve in the future more towards a curator of data. Either it is in a visual sense, as we are currently doing by designing, or in like an economic manner, as Angelos said before, or in the processes, or in the tools. So yeah, I think it was really an extension of Angelos' answer, to be honest. Like, he was literally 100%.
Anybody else can hop in freely. It's not like a structured discussion, so please do if you feel
I
like
wanted to hop into the both, because like it seems to me that you have like still this very hopeful attitude, which is great. But like these discussions can become, I think, very quickly very political about the system in Greece. And I think Angelos put it at some point very correctly that it's all driven by cost in a way. And I think we have been in a streak of since 2008, maybe even before that, I would say that everything that drives Greece is economy and nothing else. So this idea, and this is what I'm trying to understand from your perspective, that the people are not so aligned with what we expect from the future. Do you really believe that it's true? Because I think like a lot of the people in Greece and especially in Athens, they are thirsty for green spaces, public spaces, reformation, but it seems to me that incentives are not there. Also, we all know that, like the Greek built environment is mainly to a very large percent shaped by developers, where, I don't know, architectural public sensitivity is very low. So I don't see how we can so easily bypass that kind of model of construction. And maybe, I don't know, Angelos, but maybe if you're involved a little bit more in this public sphere, you can share a bit more about that. But like, this is really concerning to me as to where we're headed,
Yeah, I will wait for you to finish. I just want to add a couple of points to clarify what I meant, because perhaps it's misunderstood. I didn't say that. I don't believe it is a people's issue, as Gustavo is saying. I don't think actually that I wasn't trying to say that we're not aligned into like wanting a green Athens. What I was trying to say is that essentially, first of all, we're not participating in the decision making, which means that, as you're suggesting, I mean, I'm not going to talk about the corruption aspect, because that would need 2 hours and a very heated discussion on my end. So I'll leave it aside. I'm known for being radical in how I think about politics. I'll leave politics aside so that we save ourselves a rough night. But I will just talk about what I think in the planning perspective. And I think what I was trying to say is essentially, we as citizens, right, need to participate in how the decisions are made. But in order for us to do that, first of all, we have to be given the opportunity from municipalities. And I think there are municipalities that are eager to do that. But then the fear is always, and it comes from my sort of like perspective of trying to do that. Actually, a few months ago, I was in Kalamata, I was in the park waiting for people to hear what people want. And people didn't have a way to participate in a meaningful way. It was just a demonstration against sort of like, the political aspect. And I think that's perfectly healthy, but participation means also to actually, be part of the designing, of the planning with your needs. I was also part of the first super block sort of like experiment in Barcelona, where I could also see people being fiercely against the pedestrianization of a relatively irrelevant in terms of traffic part of the city, where still they couldn't understand the benefit of what the sort of like pedestrianization is going to bring to their area. Where today is the super block actually became like very popular, and then also the newest sort of like government was actually elected with a pledge to essentially stop the super blocks. And if you think about these sort of like, now, like, I'm not going to even go into Trump's America and all of that stuff, because again, it's going to lead us to a very rough night. I would just say, us understanding why the pedestrianization or the greenification of our house is going to bring sort of like a huge change to our lives is something that I think is also missing. So looking at the chat as well, like inspiring ourselves. I'll give you the most simple example from my life, right? I was looking for a new flat in Vienna, and I found this really beautiful flat in front of the river. It was not too expensive, so I could afford it. And I was like, okay, I love this thing. I could see the river, etc. But there was a big sort of like street, very busy traffic street in front of it. And I was wondering what noise would affect my life. And I just read through some research, because I was like, I have to understand this from a different perspective. And I just read like 10 decibels of an extra noise at night kill you 10 years younger. And I was like, this I cannot afford, right? Like, I cannot afford dying 10 years younger just because I live in a busy traffic straight. So that is what I'm trying to say by sort of like a understanding. I'll say this last bit, and I know I'm talking too long. I was trying to be short with my presentation so I can be more sort of participative in the comments. I've built quite a few labs up to now, and my incentive is always to build like data labs. I very recently had the sort of like lack of getting to know Norman Foster like personally when I was helping him like sort of like come up with this sustainable cities program that they now have at the Norman Foster Foundation. And I actually was trying to convince Norman Foster himself like that they need a lab for every city that because they're doing this in pilot cities, that they need a lab for every city that they're engaging in this program. And I've said that to Kalamata, I've said that to every sort of like municipality I get involved with. And the reason why is like, okay, labs are fancy and you can have all the data, but it's one thing is that, the other is essentially getting the people to work with the city in a data-driven control room environment of some sort, where you can see the effect that the changes will have. Imagine having an open access lab where you could see your whole city's data, how it operates, and you could question through AI today. You could ask any question you want on how your street would be if in 2050, and how your street would be if it was pedestrianized in 2050, and what would that mean for your health. If you had this ability in every city in the world, people would think very, very differently about planning. I deviated a bit here, like going into a potential future, but I think this would be a beautiful future. I'm honestly trying to be positive here because we can get dark very, very quickly. So
no, I understand, and I mean I share this perspective, but I am hopeful in the fact that like given the opportunity, I do believe that Greek people are very involved with everything in a way. They are very opinionated. We can discuss how involved they are at times, but I think given the opportunity, they could be involved. I imagine a large number of people would be involved. But yeah, it was more a comment on, we don't give the opportunity or like
It is true.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I would also like to add that in a late capitalist setting, it feels like everything is financially driven. I would argue maybe to a certain extent, but in Greece it feels like, or in places where there is at least some welfare state or like some policies in place to not have that kind of like more brutal free market kind of economy, it feels like there are other ways to go and survive and sustain the system. So moving on to Nikoletta, since we are approaching the 2-hour hallmark, I would like to ask you whether you think there is a place for your research to be integrated or appropriated by the current fashion industry. Would the work of Coperni or other brands with heat-sensitive material relate to your craft? Is the application of your research in design, fashion, or construction, talking about any scale like SML-XL kind of approach, in your agenda?
Cool. Well, I'll take them one at a time, I guess. I think on the first one about the integration of fashion industry, I think that a lot of the kind of the ideas or the initiations of the prototypes are in very close relationship with the current. I mean, it has been for a few years within fashion. They're looking at a lot of alternatives for those biomaterials or for those more sustainable practices, because it is one of the highest pollutants, like the waste that comes out of the fashion industry. Also, the waste that comes out of construction is very high. But so they are quite closely in close relationship and in practice. And I think regarding the companies, I think there are kind of a few companies that they are also looking at the production of kind of biomaterial yarns that are for actual fabrication or sustainable clothing manufacturing. For the thermoset yarns, I think I have worked in the past with them, but they're quite actually, because they're based on petrochemicals. I mean, they're very nice. And when I first started working the material properties of the yarns, that's what I was looking at, because I was very much interested how you can solidify a textile to make it more structural, to be within the architectural, context. But I think then I came to realize how not sustainable they are. But I think there is again potential within the material science and all the advancements that happen that could be something that can, play both for fashion, but also hopefully both for architecture. And I guess that comes to the last question, which is an interesting one, and is one that I actually find challenging or kind of debate from time to time with myself. I think in a way the prototypes or the work are not necessarily, I mean, there could be direct architectural output, and there are great people around the field that they do tensile and textile structures computationally manufacture, and there are a lot of benefits there in relationship to how you can construct something with possibly, especially if it's needed, zero manufacturing waste, program the fibers and the materials where you have to program them. So I think that part does exist within the field of textiles and architecture. But then I think within kind of the prototypes, and that's why I somehow presented the methodology, I think what I'm most interested in how through those practices we can kind of, I mean, in a way I see it as a way of thinking through, in a way, the data that we use, where do those voices come from? So for me, it was like, all of these are devices to explore a site or a community, or to come together with other voices or with other people to create something. So it's not necessarily that these prototypes are, this is the final architectural thing. For me, they're kind of tools to open up discussions, hopefully, within particular sites and within particular communities. And we have done kind of small workshops or community-based aspects, and you can see how that in the kind of the more raising awareness or creating that environment of thinking through practices. I think so. Hopefully that answers that part.
Yeah, very, very thorough answer. I think it really answers my question. And so lastly, Marirena, do you see a future in fabrication where there is room for craftsmen and traditional ways of making, or will the construction industry be completely run by robots and spatial agents and not actual manual labor, human labor? It's a very speculative question, very futuristic, I would say, but I was really intrigued by your work.
I don't think that it's viable to talk about like a fully autonomous, non-human. It sounds a little bit sci-fi, but I think also like by the nature of our industry, and it's super hard to achieve something like that. And also, is it also a goal? Like, is it something that we want to achieve? That's, I think, the other question. There was so this kind of post-digital narrative that's often, talked about by Mario Carpo. He was calling about this new model of automation in construction, where we actually craft this kind of like neo-artisan in a way. Where we talk about, like having two entities, human and non-human, working together. And I think this can be a very productive partnership. And this doesn't need necessarily to be, human and robot. It can be human and AI, talking about some previous work that were shown. So I think definitely from my perspective, I'm hoping we're moving into a hybrid future. I will say it like this. I'm not entirely sure yet, but I'm hoping we are moving towards there. Because also, like we try to create all these automated systems. Somehow, none of it moves forward. We always get stuck at walls and challenges of, like deploying that, and probably there's a reason for that. And like we as humans, as makers, because at the end of the day, like making involves a lot of complex behaviors in it. I think we need the human aspect to that, and the sensitivity that is related to that, and the locality that is embedded into that. So I do hope, can end it with that we are moving into hybrid situation. And this is also where, like my work is, it didn't start out like this, but, every time that I did something, I was like, does this make sense? Like every time a system gets more and more complex, you think, okay, you start the first response is, oh, how can we solve that problem? How can we automate that? With who can we collaborate to solve this kind of complexity? But at the end of the day, at some point, I realized there's probably no reason to try to resolve everything in kind of like a techno futuristic way. There's probably also value into, having a different approach to that. Yeah.
Definitely, we have to agree. So next, I would like to ask whether anybody from our Zoom, maybe Neil, has a question, or whether we would like to kind of like wrap the session up.
Can I just ask one question? I mean, first of all, thanks for these presentations. Wonderful, amazing presentations, and it's great to get the Greek mafia here. I think that the mafia is not Italian; it's Greek. But there's something very interesting about today. I mean, firstly, everyone's speaking in English, right? I mean, I studied ancient Greek. I got into Cambridge on ancient Greek, so I appreciate your culture. But everyone's speaking English, and everybody is actually in the kind of the Greek diaspora, and so nobody, I don't think, in the group is in Greece itself. And I think the one unspoken comment, I mean, it was implicit in your dialogue, but to an outsider, it might not have been so clear. I mean, Angelos said he was in Greece until 2009, and I'm kind of my hunch is that actually 2000 it was because of the economic crisis, and I think this is the kind of the interesting thing that that we have basically in Greece is that we have already a diaspora in wherever I go around the world. Kostatides is in Shanghai, Ezio Blazetti is in New York, Theodoros Galanos is in Melbourne, and so on and so on. There's this incredible, and Panagiotis Bikalatos is in Boston. There is this incredible diaspora, and in fact, 5 million Greeks live abroad and only 10 million in Greece. First, that is one of the paradoxes, I think, of Greek culture. And the second paradox, to my mind, is, I mean, having studied, Euripides and Thucydides and whatever else, Sophocles, I read all this stuff in Greek, and an incredible past, 2,000 years ago, an incredible past. But because of the economic condition in Greece today, which, as I understand it, is only going to get worse because there is a debt that is kind of building up over time, it is a kind of country with a very difficult future and a heroic, astonishing past. And I guess I want to just kind of throw that out there as a kind of comment. Maybe it's opening up a whole can of worms. How do you, as architects, working as expat Greeks, what can you do for Greek culture when we're talking about Athens, for example? Is there even the economic wherewithal to improve the city in the way that Angelos was talking about? It seems to be a real crisis at the heart of everything, at the heart of everything. Can I just throw it out there?
I love that, and if I may, I'll just full seniority here. In unfortunate, it's perhaps maybe the only time it helps. Trying to say a couple of things on that, because I think this is probably the best question we could have today. We are here, a bunch of Greeks in diaspora, as you very well say, and why is this such a big reality? I would say I left Greece in 2009, and it was actually when Greeks were ecstatic about not being in a crisis. And I actually went to London to study because it was just randomly when I managed to finish my architecture school, which took me 10 years, and eventually ended up in London when London was restarting and when Greece was going into crisis. That's why I got into Foster's. I was probably one of the first hires at Foster's after the big layoff spree they had there. And coming back to that, why I say that is like I didn't leave Greece because of the economic situation. I left Greece because I wanted to find more interesting things to do. And I think that's, although I'm not going to speak about the crisis because it was a huge blow, but I think still people leave because they cannot find as interesting things to do. And the amazing thing for me is that we're investing on things like tourism and the complete, decadence of little Greek islands in the Aegean, which I find appalling. and not in research centers, right? So the fact that we're not sort of like building, research centers and educational facilities and sort of like, all sorts of, I had, this goes really well deep in my heart. Half of the names you mentioned, Panagiotis, Michelatos, and Terzides, and there's like plenty more. I know since back in the days of when I was studying computational design, and there's a ton more today that are like French colleagues and others. And I wanted to create a network of Greek sort of computational designers, because back then we were a lot, and I was wondering, why we don't do work. And eventually, I've seen now many sort of Greek computation design groups essentially working for abroad. Why we don't do this within Greece is the big question. And for me, if I may answer to that, there's a level of it that relates to the very difficult academic sort of a reality of Greece. Although I have a lot of appreciation for academic institutions, there is a Greek mafia there as well, and I'm not going to talk about that just to be, again, not to make it like too. I have specific things to say, and then there is also the aspect of the misalignment between the economic activities of the country, tourism and what have you, like, and not really R&D, making our cities better, and an abundance of technical degrees which relate to. That's a historical thing that relates to sort of like why our parents, and I think most of people here would laugh, wanted all of us to become, at least on a PhD level. You can't, you're actually even a disgrace in your family in Greece if you don't have at least a sort of like master's degree from some sort of high level university. So there's a combination of things that make us go out to find more, I think, interesting things, as well as sort of like, the monetary sort of material reward is one of it, but like I actually think that the intellectual reward is probably most of it. And that's my take. Again, I'm a boomer, I'm old, and perhaps I didn't lead through the economic crisis as well, but yeah, I can lead the others to speak more on this.
I mean, it's an interesting way that you put it, Angelos. I think also it's, the sense of absence of future, if I can put it like this, in Greece. I think this is, what drives and keeps most of us away in a way. Because you say, okay, I go back now, maybe I can try to find something for a little while, but there's like, you cannot think of a horizon. And I think it's like super difficult to talk about any topic in Greece without touching on political aspects. And it could be a good thing, but it's also at the moment maybe a bad thing to think of everything like so deeply in political terms, and what affordances you're allowed to have in that space. And maybe I don't know from your perspective, I don't have like a lot of connections to Cyprus, but I think you talked about tourism and education, where do we invest? And maybe Cyprus is also kind of an interesting example where they are investing, I think, in educational centers. I don't know if they do it in a good way, but this seems to be something different there. So I don't know. I think there needs to be kind of like a change of priorities on the political level and on the people level. Like, what do they expect? Because we keep kind of falling into the same patterns, and I think it's kind of a vicious cycle at both levels in a way.
Evangelos, Nikoletta, what do you think about the Greek future of digital, the Greek digital future of architecture?
I don't know what to say.
Come on, Nikoletta, come on, you go first.
Come on, Nikoletta. No, I think I really share what Marirena has said. I think it's just, I think is that point that the amount of times that I've thought through that I'll go back and then I'll try. And then the amount of times I said, but what would happen? But how would it be? And then the amount of times I've spoken to practicing friends in Athens that they say, do not. But again, to be honest, the other thing, and that's quite personal, is not that I have tried and then I feel bad for myself for maybe, not maybe trying. I really, it's a very tough one, but really, I think I completely agree with Marirena. It just feels very uncertain, and yeah, I'm not sure what else to add.
I don't know if anybody else shares this feeling. Like, for me, there's also a sense of guilt with that, because essentially you're saying,
Yes.
you know, like, we should contribute to the solution, but like, it's too much.
Yes.
In a way. So, you know, you let the situation figure out itself, but there's also like a kind of guilt that comes with that in a way.
I'd like to bring the positive tone here. And I, as I said, as I wrote to Gustavo just now, like, you know, I'm the pessimist nihilist normally. That's how I present myself. So it sounds really weird that I'm trying to bring the positive note here. But at the same time, I would like to say that for me, you know, as I said, like, for many years personally, it felt bad. I mean, I didn't like living in London. I left London because it was like a terrible place to live. I was in Barcelona. I thought this would be like a dream. I didn't like Barcelona as well. I left Barcelona because I also think it's not a great place to live. I came to Vienna. I can't really say it's not a great place to live because it's like the #1 livable city in the world. So I have to say, okay, you know, the data says it's great, but I still love being in Greece. And I've tried many times in my career to try to find the opportunity to go back then. I had like really bad sort of like experiences, but I also, like, now with my latest sort of like, you know, involvement in this municipality, and it's not really sort of like the political power that I'm aligned with or anything like that. I'm telling you one thing that is like, you know, and I'm trying to do it myself, like, try to push to go, you know, get involved in some things, and you will see that there's a lot of incentive from the community, that the like-minded community, to do that. And I think we should harness that incentive. I mean, I feel that there is a lot of Americans today that have left the US and live in Barcelona, that actually feel that they're giving up on their country, but at the same time they're really happy to not be there. But at the same time, you know, like, you cannot leave the whatever others, you know, be there, and sort of like, you know, you need to help the reality that you want to have. So you need to channel it in a way. I don't know. Like, I think we need, especially in architecture and the big one, we need a lot of work. In Greece, we have an actual problem with our cities. They don't work in terms of their mobility, in terms of their, like, you know, the resilience, in terms of like its architecture at the end of the day. And we have a great opportunity. So we should at least try. Perhaps out of this we make a little sort of like manifesto of Greek digital architecture.
Great.
I mean, just to make that, maybe I've put something personal I forgot to mention was that Etty, of course, in Markopoulou in IAC, and I'm actually writing 2 books, essentially about the future. With Etty, it's about the future of AI in education, and also with Theodoros Galanos, another book on AI. And in a sense, you know, this organization is called Digital Futures, you know, and so many of the figures within this domain, digital futures, are Greek. You know, it's incredible. But in a way, it seems like kind of not only you economically kind of restricted what you can do in Greece, but there also seems to be another mafia, as you put it, was that I don't think the digital is very central to education in Greece. Maybe I'm wrong, but it's a very interesting predicament in which you guys find yourselves, and I think there should be some organization, a kind of self-help organization of the Greek diaspora.
Happy to be part of it.
Yes.
Well, thank you for this insightful comment and question to the panel, Neil. I also come from a little bit of a different generation than most of the people here, so the crisis kind of found me in a state of, I guess, being a child, really. So it's a really different dynamic choosing to live after you have lived through all that kind of like turbulence, be it political, be it financial, or whatever. So I also think that the brain drain is going to continue for many, many years onwards because of all the things that were mentioned, and because of the lack of agility, resilience, and infrastructure. Like the digital comment that the comment you made about the digital realm or digital fabrication and research in Greece is a question of infrastructure. Like the biggest universities in Greece are just now starting to get grants for like one robotic arm or whatever, and then it's a question of like know-how and sharing that maybe from the diaspora to Greece. But I would say it's a question of the pace that things happen in Greece to an extent. I don't know if other people share my thoughts in this, but anyways, it's a very open-ended discussion.
No, it is. I agree with you, Smaro, 100%. Like that, it is a matter of pacing, and it actually goes in two directions again. So, if you're currently looking for professional stability in Greece, I would definitely advise anybody who thinks to go back to not do it. Like, based on what we are all hearing from our friends, architects, and that. But on the other hand, whenever there is a crisis such as this, which is both an intellectual crisis and both financial crisis, there are amazing opportunities. And I think that there is a lot of room for innovation now, not in 2 years, because these things are going to happen somewhere. And if we pick up pace in Greece fast, like we can start, implementing new solutions, because the Greek public is always very open in protesting their ideas and discussing, they want to be heard. Like, I'm not saying this into any political sense, right? I'm just saying that they are active. We have a lot of active citizens in this. So essentially the involvement, in my case and Angelos' case, mostly, the involvement of the public in procedures or, legislation, regulations, even in design, in a way, like, would be welcomed. And I think that this is a massive window for opportunity right now if you're looking to set up something, not necessarily in Greece, but involve Greece, Yeah, that was it.
So
maybe I could just add one final comment. I mean, I think alongside okay. So what I always found interesting about Greece as well is that you've been exporting words. The word hybridity is a Greek, right? And in a way, I come from a colonizing country myself, from the UK, but you've colonized the entire, I think, vocabulary of architectural theory, the parametric, rhizomic, almost every word, including the word architecture, is Greek. So in some ways, it's kind of interesting that we all live in a hybrid world, and a world in which you guys have given us a lot of concepts, architectural concepts, a lot of words and so on, and it's a kind of two-way process. But I just want, maybe I should just we should really wrap this up there. But I think it was a really super interesting session today. I hope we've sown the seed of a kind of diaspora, whatever it is, Greek diaspora organization or something. But there is clearly something very interesting happening, and there's a lot of contributions coming to the world of digital futures from Greece, which is really very refreshing to see and good to see, despite the problems that you guys have got back home. So I just want to thank Smaro for putting this together. Great.
My pleasure. And
good to see this, not an end, but the beginning of maybe some other sessions on, I don't know, whatever that might be, Greek female voices or something like that, or whatever in the future. And I certainly hope that we can get Angelos to come and talk about his software on one of our tutorial sessions, because I think we really need people to, especially now that infrared has taken off as a startup. And I look forward to seeing more from you guys. I don't know whether there's any final thing that any of you want to say, but
thank you for organizing this. It's actually very, 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 very nice to be part of it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Well, I just want to say that actually, and I always mention this, but the whole organization, which is an incredible thing because everyone's doing it out of their love of the subject and for free and everything, but it's a bit like an iceberg, right? You'll see me, but actually there's a whole organization by Digital Futures to help support this, and Gustavo's with us right now, and so on. And so I think it's the organization that needs to be thanked. Also, I would say also thanks for kicking off the new year, because we now got a series of sessions on this question of hybridities coming up in the weeks to come, of which the Greeks were there first, as ever. So thank you.
Hybrid is also a Greek word, and I'm going to close the session with that comment. So thank you very much to all of the speakers for accepting the invitation first and contributed with such meaningful presentations and comments to the discussion. Thank you, Neil, for your very interesting input from an external observer point of view, from a British point of view as well, like more of a colonial lens to things. But and also thank you, Gustavo, for streaming this session, and to all of our team, including Bavlin, Virginia, and everybody else. So I'm going to wrap this up, and I hope we can have another emerging Greek hybridity session, like part 2 or whatever, with other creators within Greece also, because that was a big question for me. Everybody is stationed somewhere around the world, but not really in Greece. And I think that's something that we should review in the future and like kind of try to bridge. So thank you to everybody who participated today again, and have a great day, everyone.
Thank you for hosting us, Maria.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And thank you
so
to
much,
the organization for hosting us.
See you soon.